Good morning. Now we're back on now in a hearing of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, Transnational Crime, Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, and Global Women's Issue. And the title, if we could, if you guys are coming to the hearing, you need to sit down. Thank you. She's like, I'm at home here. Close the door. We're working over here. All right. Anyway, this is the title of the hearing is The Future of Iraq, What's Next After ISIS. So we'll have one panel testifying here today, and the panel features, of course, former Congressman Frank Wolf, who was just part of our previous nomination hearing as well, where he introduced the President's nominee to be the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom. He's a distinguished senior fellow at the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. And Ms. Denise Natali, who's the director of the Center for Strategic Research at the Institute for National Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. And both of them have long and distinguished careers, and we're fortunate to have the benefit of their expertise and testimony here today. The hearing is especially timely, not only because we have a new administration that is still working through and formulating its Iraq policy, but also because for some of the communities in Iraq that are in question, and are being impacted. For them, the hour is late, and their continued presence in the lands they've inhabited since antiquity literally hang in the balance. 3 years ago, ISIS began a brutal campaign in northern Iraq, a campaign against Christians, Yazidis, Shia Muslims, and other smaller religious minorities, ruthlessly murdering innocent men and women and children and destroying communities that have been there for millennia. The images of these vulnerable communities fleeing for their lives sent shockwaves around the world. During the ISIS siege of Mount Sinjar, tens of thousands of Yazidis were trapped without food or water, and the Islamic State massacred and kidnapped and enslaved members of this community. Girls were separated by eye color and sold as sex slaves to ISIS fighters based on their preference. Similarly, in Iraq, ancient Christian community, their ancient Christian community is and was under assault. 50,000 fled Mosul to the Nineveh plains as ISIS advanced eastward. Days after the Sinjar massacre, ISIS seized Kurokosh, which is the city in Iraq with the second largest population of Christians, and thousands more were displaced. Death, kidnapping, and forced conversions ensued. Places of worship and holy sites that had been there for centuries were defaced. They were bombed, looted, destroyed, including the 1,400-year-old monastery of St. Elijah. It was clear that the bloody campaign targeting ethnic and religious minorities amounted to genocide. And the Obama administration and now the Trump administration have rightfully declared it as such. While these designations are significant, quite frankly, even historic, and clearly justified, the fact is that the words alone are cold comfort to these communities whose lives have been upended, places of worship destroyed, and their communities and families ripped apart. One of the issues that prompted this hearing is the seeming disconnect between the millions of dollars in U.S. humanitarian assistance to Iraq and the inability of these communities targeted with genocide to adequately access this aid. Clear congressional directives over multiple years have gone unheeded, unimplemented, and frankly, ignored. There has been an over-reliance beginning during the previous administration and seemingly continuing apace today under the new administration on the United Nations Development Fund to administer U.S. assistance. This UN agency has shown little interest in following congressional appropriations language, and our own U.S. government agencies have not demanded that accountability. And so I'm heartened that Administrator Mark Green himself, a former member of Congress, is now at the helm of USAID, and I know he is personally invested in addressing this issue. Despite divisions within Iraq's religious minority communities, I was encouraged to learn of the creation of the Nineveh Reconstruction Committee, a formal ecumenical partnership between the three largest Christian churches in Iraq, the Chaldean Catholic Church, the Syriac Catholic Church, and the Syriac Orthodox Church, representing the overwhelming majority of Christians that remain in Iraq. This was an important step. As we discuss the plight of Iraq's religious minority communities, we also must look at the broader context of Iraq's minorities, particularly the Kurdish people living in Iraqi Kurdistan. Once again, all eyes were on Iraq last week as the Kurdistan regional government pressed forward with their non-binding referendum for independence from Iraq, despite broad international calls to delay, including from the highest levels of the U.S. government. I was among those urging a delay for many reasons, not the least of which was my concern about how the already vulnerable religious minorities, especially those residing in the contested areas, would fare in such a scenario. Following the referendum, the tensions are predictably high. At this time, The U.S. is not supportive of a unilateral referendum by the KRG. However, we must urge restraint from both sides and work with both sides to de-escalate tensions between Baghdad and Erbil, as well as with Iran and Turkey. Any violence or further escalation from any party will only deepen the problem. I'm concerned about news reports that Iranian and Turkish militaries are engaged in provocative military exercises near the Kurdish regions in Iraq, and that the central government in Baghdad is taking retaliatory and even discriminatory action against the KRG and Kurdish members of parliament. The KRG are important partners in the fight against ISIS, and we, along with our partners, including Iraq's central government, must maintain our focus on defeating ISIS. In the interim, we should support KRG requests for mediation with the government of Iraq and create space for them to present its views. In the coming weeks and months, the U.S. must be forward-leaning in our Iraq strategy in the hopes of preserving the communities that have been a part of the fabric of Iraq for centuries. Their continued existence and even their flourishing is not simply a moral imperative given the grave injustices that they have suffered. It is also a key strategic and national security priority because they are key to any future pluralistic Iraq that respects religious freedom. Often we consider patience a virtue, but the time for patience on this issue has passed. Urgency must now animate us moving forward. The U.S. should implement timely and targeted assistance to the Christians, Yazidis, and other minority internally displaced persons targeted by ISIS so that they are able to return to their homes. I look forward to the recommendations from our witnesses in this regard. You have experience that will contribute greatly to this discussion. Senator Kane. Procedural update. Our understanding is there's a, I never heard of this term before, an informational hold. Hopefully that.
But somebody wants information before they vote? That's so shocking.
Well, anyway, hopefully we'll be able to work through that, and then we'll have to work out the differences between the two. But we're hopeful that there are some differences between the House and the Senate version, and so that makes it a little bit different than some of the other things we've done on this territory because we got to figure out a process for working out those differences. But hopefully that will happen. I want to. Dr. Natali, I wanted to ask you first just about this whole, because you've talked about how the situation with the Kurds has exacerbated the difficulties, the broader difficulties in the region. And I know this kind of steps a little bit out of the lane of this hearing, but I think it's directly related to it, and that is whether the appropriate role of the United States at this point is to try to get both sides to sort of lower the tension and the rhetoric, not to do anything that provokes the other side to have to act or save face. In essence, is it not in the best interest of the United States viewing that issue holistically, and I think in the best interest of the parties involved, to make the following argument to both sides, and that is, we're not asking the Kurdistan or the Barzanis or anybody to abandon their desires for independence. What we are asking them to do is to take steps to lower the sort of temperature and the rhetoric, because there's still some issues that we need to be worked through. And the flip side would be, of course, to ask the government in Baghdad to take some steps that would in no way be used against them to argue that they've somehow caved, but by the same token, show a desire to be open to dialogue on this topic in the future, but right now, sort of in the interim, try to lower the temperature as well, because there are still so many other issues at play. And in fact, the tension between these two is being used in many ways by other actors in the region to sort of look for strategic advantage. Do you think there's an openness on both sides to that, or is there openness to that on both sides, or are they backing themselves into a corner from which they can only fight their way out of?
Thank you, Senator Rubio. I agree with you that first and foremost, overall, we should be trying, and we have leverage to diffuse the tensions, to say, just, cool it or relax. And by the way, that is going on behind the scenes. I mean, there's what's going on in the newspaper, and there's what's going on internally, and there is these issues. Here's where I would say yes, and. We have to be careful about the way that we deal with the Kurds as well, in the sense that absolutely important partners, invaluable Peshmerga support, but if we're emphasizing the territorial integrity of the Iraqi state, enhancing Iraqi state institutions, there are parts of overemphasizing, or I should be careful about using the word coddling, does not allow negotiations either. So the negotiations will occur, but if we're not using our leverage to the point that says, and we've been very clear, and I agree with the statements, you also need to go down to Baghdad because we are sending a lot of things to you. So I'll be frank, my discussions the week, I was there 3 days before the referendum, and many told me, they said, this is great, now at least we got your attention. Okay, there was a lot of pressure not to have it done. We're back. You can't forget about us now. And again, there's an honest desire to have this. There were many people who did not want to have this, and they know they have to negotiate with Baghdad. So yes, encourage our partners because we are providing them with military support. So my question is, how are we going to use our leverage to encourage that negotiation? Because they said to me, you're not going to do anything. What are you going to do? You need us too much. So our attitude is, we're too important for you, and anything that happens to us, you'll come and save us. And in Iraq right now, most of the Iraqis, apart from the prime minister, is very moderate. The problem is most Iraqis now, and Arab Iraqis, Sunni and Shia, are reacting to this. So he's being pressured by the people. And so again, our role is to mediate that, but because we have so much leverage with the Kurds, to be very careful, continue that partnership, but don't overly enable to the point where nobody thinks they have to cut a deal. And I don't think that we've worked that part out quite well.
Well, the only addition I would make to that is, I do think my feeling is that the government of Kurdistan would probably be open to a number of measures, joint patrols of certain crossings, perhaps increased revenue flow back to Baghdad, so long as they are not asked to completely abandon or feel like they somehow have foreclosed the ability for a dialogue in the future about their status. I think the potential irritant that no one has counted on is the capability of Iranian-controlled militia groups to act unilaterally.
That's right.
Against a border crossing or a territorial space in order to trigger a conflict that they view would be beneficial to their desire to have control over the region and over those oil-producing places in particular. So that's an actor that's probably even outside of a body's control and a part of this dangerous game in the region. So it's something to bear watching because there are, in the context of this hearing, a significant number of religious minorities who have sought and received refuge within the Kurdish areas, whom will be directly impacted if this thing heads in a bad direction. And so that's why it's related to the topic we're discussing here today.
I agree with you. I agree with that point. I just want to make one more caveat, and that is, be also careful with our Kurdish partners, and this has been, again, written in the documents by the Assyrian Federation of Europe, that many of them think that they're also being erased by some of the Kurdish authorities as well. So we have to be careful. Baghdad's fault is they're not paying enough attention. Some of the Kurdish region's fault is that they've confiscated lands. The lands were not just confiscated by Iranians, they were confiscated by the Kurdistan regional government as well, and this is documented. So we need to be careful and to persuade and encourage our partners to watch this behavior. If we ignore it and we turn our eye, then it will continue. So good partners and good friends tell their friends not to do these things that are undermining the minorities as well.
Okay. Mr. Wolf, you may have alluded to this in your statement, and I may have missed it, and I apologize, but when you were there, your recent trip, did you visit with the UN officials during your trip?
Yes, we did.
So did they indicate to you that they'd received guidance from the State Department or USAID regarding how U.S. assistance dollars were to be handled and spent?
No, they did not. The woman who runs the UN is American from Texas, very, very capable person. She came up and briefed us and I think was doing a very good job, but she did not get into that. Many of the Christians that will not go in to the UN-run camps because they are afraid. I mean, just the young lady yesterday who said she saw, and I think she can better explain it than I can, she saw the man who did terrible things to her living in a camp. And so the Christian community are afraid to go into the camps, and many of the Yazidis are also afraid to go in. But overall, I think the UN has done some very good things. It just hasn't gotten down to the Christians and the Yazidis and some of the religious minorities.
Well, just that fact you point to right there, is it your view, or did you raise that? Was it raised in front of you to the UN officials while you were there that a lot of the people who need this aid can't get it because they are afraid to come to where you are because of some of the people around here.
Yes.
And their response was?
There really wasn't a response. I mean, it's been common knowledge that if a Christian family is going to go into a camp, is in the next tent, is the brother an ISIS supporter, you're just not going to go there. Many of the Christians have left, have gone north. They're in Rubio. They're in different camps. They're in old shopping malls. Others have moved into Turkey. Others have moved into Lebanon. Others have moved different places. Many would want to come back. It's a beautiful country. The northern part of Iraq is magnificent. The biblical history there, when we were there one other time, we went to Nahum's tomb, Old Testament. The history is so rich, and they love their country, and I may say, they are really people of strong faith. And so but they're not going to go into those camps. They're just not going to go. And so I think it's and most of our money has been gone into the UN. It's now time for Mark Green to take some of that and give it to the Yazidis, and let's have a counseling program for the Yazidi women and girls. Let's bring in IJM, or let's bring in different psychological people to give counseling. We met with the leader of the Yazidi community, Baba Charis. They need help when they rescue these people. What do these women do? And so they need help. But also, let's give it to the Christian community. And Bartella, Karakush, when they come back, the water system, and help them with their houses. So they feel, and I think if you talk to the Knights of Columbus and some of the others, and let me say, the Knights of Columbus have done an incredible job. Another group, Samaritan's Purse, have done an incredible job. I was with the Catholic nun, Sister Diana. She said Samaritan's Purse. I asked Samaritan's Purse, they say Knights of Columbus. I mean, it's the most ecumenical group over there. They love each other. Work it through Samaritan's Purse, work it through Knights of Columbus, work it through World Vision, work it through them, and let them. But the Christian community, not for any overt meanness, but has been neglected. And now that ISIS has pretty much, not totally, pretty much been defeated, this is a time to aid the Christian community, the Yazidi community, including counseling for these young girls. Yeah, as of this moment, but they told us there were 3,000 girls still being held.
But the best way to describe the situation then is there's no ill will here. There's no bad faith. The United States Congress has appropriated and directed that American taxpayer funding be directed to assist religious minority, including Yazidis and Christian communities. The money has been sent to the UN in order to do that. The UN would say, the money's here, it's available, they can come receive the aid, but they don't come for the reasons you've outlined, and as a result, our intent is not being carried out, and it doesn't seem like the UN officials feel as if they're under any sort of directive to do anything other than to say it's available, but not go any further than that in terms of asking why are people not utilizing it or why are they not coming.
I think you summed it up. I would like to see some of our money go to Samaritan's Purse, to World Vision, to Knights of Columbus.
In essence, to organizations that are going out to those in need as opposed to waiting for them to come.
Right, they're out there. Samaritan's Purse runs a hospital in Mosul, just outside Mosul. I visited. All they treat are Muslims. Give it to Samaritan's Purse. Give it to Sister Diana. Give it to the Knights of Columbus. The Knights of Columbus, they're rebuilding villages. So refunnel, I'm not saying we take everything that goes to the UN, but refunnel some of that money and give it to groups who are really not who are new, who are saying, I'll go in if you give it to me, who are already there. Samaritan's Purse has been there for a couple of years. Knights of Columbus have been there for a couple of years. Sister Diana, the Dominican sisters, are from there. Give some of the money to them so they can help their own community, not because they're Christians, but because they've been subject to genocide. Give it to some of the Yazidi groups, not because they're Yazidis, but because they've been subject to genocide. So divert some of the money that's going to the UN and give it to some of these groups.
So then my last question is, your suggestion of a special coordinator would be someone that would sort of oversee this process and make sure that some of these steps are taken. It could, and I'm not against the notion of a special coordinator, but I guess my question is, it is also something that USAID, under our current structure, could also take it upon themselves to drive these funds in that direction, but you just feel that it won't happen given all the other things USAID is facing?
I think there's a resistance in government to do this. And secondly, it isn't only AID, Senator. You need somebody at the State Department who's not AID. You need somebody who can talk to General Mattis at the Department of Defense. It needs to be when, I think the model really was Senator Danforth. He was able to go anywhere in the government to deal with a problem. There were some security problems. There were aid. They were giving the Sudan. The government was aiding the Lord's Resistance Army. He was able to go everywhere. So this person has to have the ability not only to deal with AID, the State Department, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, CIA, everybody. Also, I believe it is important to bring to justice those who have done what they have done to the Christians and Yazidis. And they unless we go in, we went in a tunnel where ISIS said, dust the tunnel, find the fingerprints. I had a young Yazidi girl come by my office a couple of months ago, 6, 7, 8 months ago. Her name was Bazi. You ought to talk to her. She said the man who held her and did terrible things to her was an American citizen who used to show her on his cell phone pictures of his wife and children back in the United States. Where is Abdul Ameriki? Let's track him down. Let's do fingerprints. Why have we not brought cases against those who beheaded the American citizens, the 4 American citizens? Track them down, bring them to justice. We used to fund, my committee, we funded the International Criminal Court. We funded Crane to come after Sierra Leone, Charles Taylor. They're all in jail now. It took a lot of effort. The same thing should be done to bring justice, because if these people don't be brought to justice, many will embed in. Do you ever remember the story 5, 10 years ago? You find a former worker at a General Motors plant was a Nazi. They bed in, they come over there. Let's find those people, bring them to justice. The international criminal, bring them here. So I think this person has to be bigger than just dealing with Mark Green at AID.
Got it. Senator King.
Just one.
Yeah, it's an important point, because what I hear you describe, Mr. Wolf, is that basically a whole-of-government coordinator that can bring to bear the different agencies and tools available to the United States government in a coordinated fashion, not just to deliver aid and relief, but also reconstruction, assistance with governance, and justice, bringing people to justice, and in particular this horrifying case that you outlined of a U.S. citizen, and if that individual is still alive, they should be brought to justice, and even if they're not, their name and circumstances should be known to the American people. Do you have anything further? Because it's we've gone beyond our allotted time, and I thank you both for being so patient because of our hearings and the vote and the like. This was an important hearing, as you can tell, but by the attendance and the interest, and I'm glad you were able to shine light on it, but more importantly, that you were both able to provide us with specific public policy recommendations. Often we have these hearings, we hear a lot about the problems and some vague notions. You've both been pretty specific, which is very helpful in terms of our work here and what to advocate for, what we need to be pushing for, and so we thank you both for that. The record for this hearing is going to remain open for the next 48 hours. So again, I want to thank both of you for your patience, your time, and your work on this topic. It's a lot of hard work. Your dedication to it is very critical. And again, thank you. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.